this is Zombieapple224 or Sauce Boss, depending on where you follow me. And this is the second video in my shading series. The first video where we went over about shading, the basic shading technique that I use. That was the first video. If you didn't see it, I can probably leave a link on this video. And in the second one, we're going to be taking what we learned in the first one, and we're going to be applying it to a character. This is Katie Cat. So I was going to just start off with an already lined out character and colored character, but I think I want to take a couple of steps. I'll do a time lapse so you don't have to wait through the whole thing. But I wanted to give you a little insight into the process that I go through, you know, going from a sketch, an inked sketch, onto computer, and then through the whole ordeal up to shading. So, you know, for this first part, I'm going to ink it. Well, it's already inked, but I'm going to go over it on the computer program on Photoshop. And the first thing I do is I usually lower the opacity so it's not so intense. This has already been scanned in. I actually use an app for this as of late called, I think it's called Cam Scanner. Let me just check my phone. Yep, it's called Cam Scanner. It's pretty good. You can take a picture of a page and it will immediately find the edges of the page and give you a perfect scan from your phone. So I'm not endorsed by them or anything. I just think it's a really useful tool for people who want to do a quick scan. It's good if you're not by a scanner or if you don't have a scanner. So I'm going to fill this bottom layer in here with white so that I'm not getting that checkerboard pattern. But I'm also going to lower this opacity a lot so that I can tell the difference between that and my darker pen. Okay, I'm going to change the, for those of you who are using a tablet that has pressure sensitivity, if you have a pen or a tablet, a stylus that uses pressure sensitivity, the way you take care of that and make sure that this pressure sensitivity is working in Photoshop is you go over here to the brush presets. If you can't find it here, it should be up here in Window, and you just go down and find Brush. And you find this tab right here called Shape Dynamics, and you're going to set control. Mine's already on, but you set it to pen pressure. Another thing you can do is you can come down here to transfer and apply pen pressure to here, and what this does, see, this means that it tapers off when you're using the pen very lightly and gets thicker when you're using it, when you're pressing harder with the pen. Like that. This, whoops, not that. This, when you apply pen pressure to that, that means that when you use it lightly, it has a very low opacity, and as you press it hard, the opacity gets darker, so that you can have that to your trailing off effect. So that's it with the opacity, pen pressure on, and this is it with it off. Okay, I like to use this when I'm inking it unless I want like a special effect or something. So anyways, that's what I'm going to be using as pen settings, and I'll see you in a few minutes when I finish inking this. Okay. Welcome back. This is the inked out version. So now the next thing we're going to do is apply color. And like before with the sphere video, we apply a flat color. And what flats are is just a solid color, no shading, no lighting, no highlights. Sometimes what people like to do is they do use a sort of gradation, like a gradient. They blend multiple colors together if they really want like an emphasis on a shadow, or if they want like two colors mixed together. Like maybe I'd want something that's like a darker gray down here that slowly builds up into a lighter gray up here, and then doing the shading and everything on top of that. If there's something that you're absolutely certain you want to be consistent throughout the character's face or the picture, or what have you. Some people will do that, but for this, and for the most part, I just stick with solid flat colors. So this isn't too hard to do. It's just coloring solid colors. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to fast forward the video there too, and we'll come back to that. So, we're back. I've added in all the flat colors that I think are good. Usually I put a little more time than I just did into doing flat colors like that, but I think this is good. This is good for our purposes here. Okay, so the next step, for those of you who have followed along in the last video, know that after the color is we're going to go right to the shading. So, a couple other things I wanted to talk about that I didn't mention before is a good way to go from this line art here to so that you can select it, so that you can fill it in without having to worry about going over the lines, is getting the magic selection tool here and selecting, and it'll only get the things outside of the lines. If you have a little open space like I did down here, you just have to go across here and fill in the lines, and then with the polygon lasso tool, and then you can just, leaving that selected, you can just color it in. You can see that without the line art, it's just me scribbling it in. And yeah, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select a color art. I don't really want to select the line art because we want to leave the line art alone. We only want to affect the colors. That's where our shading is being applied. So for this, we're going to use another blue again. Nice dark blue. Also, this layer where our original sketch was, we can just toss that at this point. Once you get the line art down, you don't really need it anymore. So now, I'm going to use the mouse so it's a consistent fill. I am going to go on top of the color layer, the flats layer, and sorry I don't have mine labeled, I don't usually do that, and with the colors selected, if you have them unselected, there's a little trick. Select the layer that you want to select the stuff on, hold down Control, and click on the little box, and it'll select everything in that layer and only what's in that layer, only the objects, not any of the unaffected areas. So, once we've got that selected, we're going to go over with this blue and just fill the whole thing in. Now, like I said in the last video, you don't want it to just be this solid blue. So you choose something like overlay or soft light. Now I usually like to use soft light. Now it doesn't look like it changed much, but if I turn it off and on again, you can see that it's darker. And that looks okay, but trust me, it's going to look a lot better when we get to the shading part. So I'm just going to start off by showing you a couple of spots, or a way to start off. Once I get into the part where it's just everything I told you, but just working on that, then I'll go to fast forwarding the video. So now we're going to get our eraser, and we're going to start working on it. Now the first thing I like to do is, first of all, we want to bring this down to 25% again. Okay. I like to do a big sweeping stroke. Like, let's say we want our light source to be up at the top of our head like this. So I like to do a big thing that kind of overall covers the entire object as a whole. Actually, let's set it to overlay this layer, and let's bring it down even lower, so we're taking less. The smaller the number for your opacity, the less you're going to take off with every stroke. So we're going to start off there. And what I like to do is, for the whole thing, take some off. And remember, when we're getting closer to the point where our light source is hitting, we focus on that area more. We like do the whole thing, and then a little bit less, and a little bit less, and we draw ourselves back to where the highlighted area is. So now we have an overall sort of gradient going from the highest, most lit point to the lowest point. Usually, if there's a light above someone, you're going to get a general darker as you go down. But then, so I usually like to start with that, and then go back and work on the more detailed areas. So now we're going to go to a even more refined set of areas, such as just the general big objects, like this eyeball, for example. We're going to erase a little bit like that. The bridge of her nose, as well as the rest of her, the top of her head like this. Let me take a couple of strokes. There we go. Now you can see there's a difference there. It's not really showing up when you use overlay. It doesn't really show up on the whites, but we're going to go back and do that again a little bit later. And remember, with opacity, it'll stay the same. It'll take the same amount off with every stroke, but once you lift your pen back up again and put it back down, it'll take another bit off. So if you're doing this and you're only seeing a little bit come off, no matter how many times you go over it, it's because you got to lift your pen up and do it again, and now it's going to take more off. So starting with these general areas like the hair pieces, the head shape, the eyes, and we're focusing on the tops where the light would hit. For example, with this one, I was thinking about how it would hit here, but that this would create a shadow. So we avoid the areas where there would be shadow, such as down here. I'm going to do a little bit, going to just take a little bit off because it's not completely dark, and take off more when it comes to being up here. And then for the bridge of the nose, that sticks out a little bit, so you'd see some, as it slopes down, you'd see more light hitting here at this tip of the bridge here than you would around here. And work on the eyes. Okay. Maybe a little bit under here. For example, we're going to get the ear here. The top of the ear would definitely have a lot going on. And maybe a little bit on the side here. But definitely the top. So that's where we take off the most. And that's really, to simplify it down, that's what we're doing. We're taking off more, we're erasing the shadow more in areas where the light's hitting it the most, and then as it kind of slowly, gradually changes to an area where it's maybe not hitting it as much, we take less. You barely go over that area. Part of it is keeping track of what you've already gone over and what you haven't, and just doing it, kind of like working your way back, kind of like doing an area and then doing a little bit less and a little bit less until you've got it to the one area. And part of it is also just taking a step back, seeing how it looks and seeing what areas do we need to take off a little more. I think maybe around here it's not quite light enough, so we're going to just zoom back in there. And hold on. Okay. Whoa, wrong tool. Let me take a little bit more off. So it looks a little bit more, looks a little bit better. The hair. Why does it keep doing that? Looks like I use a little more light. A little bit down there. Then we can go over this ear. Remember, we want to get the spot that it's probably hitting it the most. Like, really focus the pen in the area. Really focus your erasing in the area where it's doing that the most. Where the light is hitting it the most. Okay. And for under here, we know that this lobe part, it's kind of, you know, for this design, this is supposed to come over the interior of the ear, so we're going to leave the edge of this alone, because it's going to cast a shadow there. You might be able to tell. And if this doesn't look all that impressive, don't worry. This doesn't usually look all that impressive when you do it like this. But the idea is we're going to go back, we're going to add some shadows back in and then erase some more again once we do that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to go into the white and I'm going to add some more blue. Actually, let's try something here. What if we just did normal, lowered the opacity? Actually, yeah. Sometimes it works with overlay, sometimes it works with soft light, and sometimes you really just gotta just turn the opacity down. That'll apply it to the white. So maybe just do that instead. But, you know, don't completely forget about the using overlay and soft light, because that can work pretty well as well. So now our shadows are sticking out a little bit more. We know where to erase a little bit better. Sometimes you can get this where it's where it's kind of blotchy. There's a blue spot here, here. So you just go over those areas again. And it still looks kind of dark. Don't worry about that. One of the things we do before we go back and do more shading again is we're gonna go back over that again with 100% opacity on the brush over all the areas that we are certain we want to have 100% light. So just kind of think of the opacity on the eraser as being how much, the percent being how much light you want to let in with each brush stroke. Zoom in here. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and finish this up, and I'm going to come back after I've erased these shadows out. Okay. Okay, so I did a little bit more erasing to what looked like it was a good even spot. This is still too dark for what I want to do, but that's why I came back, is because now I'm going to show you the next step of how to get it even lighter. Another thing I didn't consider, I suppose I should have, is I kind of assumed that people looking into this already had some experience in shading, understanding three-dimensional forms, where the light would hit on certain things. If you're not that kind of person, I would say, if you're not the person who's already had experience with shading or knows just basic shading, I would say go look into that. I'd say do some research first before you come into this. Look at what it's like to shade in different forms. I know some of it might be confusing, like for my character, because mine has a very stylized sort of thing going on with like the hair and sometimes the ears. But for your own character, you should have a good understanding of their sort of overall form, what's round, what's flat, and how to shade those different things. So I would say go and research that first, look at like basic shading, understanding how light hits objects, how to highlight rounded things. I hope I've been doing a good job explaining some of it, like saying that the light would hit here, and then because of the ridge of her brow, they would be a little bit darker around here, and then the light would hit here more. But you know, if you don't have shading experience already, or you've done that before, I'd say go research it, practice drawing something drawing an actual life object, like a still life, and then shading that, or even just take line art and practice shading that. I'd say figure that out first, because this isn't teaching you just how to shade, I'm just trying to show you my method of shading. Okay, so for everybody else, let's go back into this. I'm going to now turn up the opacity all the way to 100, because what we're going to do now is we're going to go over the general areas that I am absolutely certain, that we are absolutely certain we want 100% light in. Like the top of the ear, maybe a little bit around the hairs like this, and now you're going to see that it's really brightening it up. And again, we want to be using a soft brush for this. Soft brush the whole time, erasing when we're erasing this, so that it gives that blended sort of edge. And now we're really brightening it up, we can tell. Now we don't have to worry about taking it off little by little. We are taking it off 100%. For the eye, there's really not going to be that much shadow for the eye, because it's a very reflective thing. Gonna go across the cheeks and go over. Sometimes you might get like the edges just too hard. Get a bigger brush when you do things like that, and the edge of the low opacity brush will change it up a bit. For this, let's focus on the mouth, give you a little understanding of some not so common shapes, something that isn't just as simple to figure out like the cheeks, or something round like the eyes, like this lip coming down here. The upper lip on people in general, and should be in your characters, even though you don't see the line there, you should imagine that the upper lip is kind of attached to where the nose is. When someone smiles, there seems to be a sort of laugh line that comes out from here, and that's because the skin is all kind of like leads up to the nose. So when her mouth is like this in this very sassy kind of look, we want to kind of imagine that this skin is kind of, it's pooching out just a little bit and just enough for this tooth to come out, and it's probably lined up pretty well with this. So sometimes you want to think of this as in levels. When you're thinking of things that are flat, you're not thinking of a rounded object like a circle, like a sphere. When you're thinking of a flat thing sticking out, you want to think of it in levels. The nose is relatively flat. It's kind of round, but it's kind of flat. And we want to think of it, since the skin of her upper lip is attached to the nose, or that same section, is we want to think of them as being pretty much on the same level. So what we want to do is we want to erase about as much. So let's actually lower that opacity down again. This is probably a spot I should have done before. We want this to be about just as light as the nose. Not quite exactly. We want to leave a little bit of shadow under there because the nose is sticking out a bit more. And if we zoom back a bit, you can kind of see that looks kind of alright. It kind of looks like, this upper lip is pooching out a little bit more than the rest of this, and that's why it's a little bit lighter than the rest of the area down here, because the light's hitting it, because it's sticking out more. And then we're going to go back to our 100 and we're going to finish this off. Oh, that's the wrong tool. I do not know why it keeps switching me back there. Hopefully I can get that fixed. And there's not too much shadow here. There shouldn't be. Maybe we should add some back, but that's actually going to be our next step, is we're going to go back over and we're going to add more shadow again, and then we're going to erase it again. Because for some of this, we've kind of, taken off a bit too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to add some more shadow to this. And we can go all the way up to 100% because that's where it was when we added it. So for things, because before we were using a circular brush, taking it off in blotches, for some things like the very edge of this eyebrow over here, we want more precise shadows. We want to add those back. So this shouldn't take as long as the other thing, because we're just, hold up. Okay, we're just adding things back. Hold on, what's going on here? Okay, I think because we erased it already, it's probably best to bring it down again. Because although we used 100%, we erased some of it. Even this part where the shadow is, it's still not 100% of the same blue that we used before. So 25 may not be the exact number here, but it's a pretty good amount. And if it's not as dark as it needs to be, you just go over it a couple times. And this time, don't worry about spots where, just worry about the spots where it's more precise. Get a smaller brush to get more precise with the shadows. Don't worry about it overflowing and coloring and shading in the same area that you just took shadow out of, because you can just go back over it again. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good idea. This time, I know I said before that I don't usually do the edge, color the shadow in, but for this case, since we've already done our erasing, we do want to do that. It's just a little bit. It's after we've already figured out where we want our highlights and our shadows. The initial process of erasing shaded areas gives us an idea of where we want all our shadows and where we want our highlights, so it shouldn't be that hard from now. I know it looks like I'm doing the very thing that I said I wasn't going to do, or that I don't do, but it's just for this part. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward the video now, up to the next step. Okay, so I'm going to come back right here. So you can see we've added some shading back in, went back into did some more detail. I did it around the nose, the eyes, added some detail around the brow, and it's starting to look darker again. Now we've gotten to a point where the highlights are really there, they're really bright, but we're also seeing some really dark shadows, so we're getting some contrast. Now, like the last step, this is going to take even less time. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go back and remove it again, because what we've done is we have added back some shadow to give it more detail again. This time we're going to go back to where we're not really detailed with our erasing, that we're going back to that very general area, so that we're not taking away that detail completely. Hold on. In order to do that, it needs some low opacity. We're not taking away that detail completely, but we're making it a little bit lighter. So this is where it is purely just like I talked about before, where some of it is kind of like taking a step back and seeing if it looks good, and not really all that technical of keeping track. This is purely just taking that step back and seeing if it looks good. Taking a look at spots and seeing, should this be lighter here, and how much lighter and where. Like, for example, in the eye right here, I don't think it should be that dark. You should still be able to see the shading, but it shouldn't be that dark. Just the top of this part and the brow should be a little bit lighter. The nose, a little bit lighter towards the bottom. Here, definitely lighter. And it gets a little bit darker. And you'll notice something here. I decided to make it a little bit lighter, even though that's where the nose is. So it's kind of, you know, why are you doing that? Why are we taking the shadow off of a spot where there's clearly a ridge and there's something casting a shadow? We're not taking it off completely, again, but we do want to take it off a bit so that it's darker down here and lighter here. We want it to be lighter here because we also have to consider that the underside of her face here is also a bit darker. So that's some weird properties you'll see of shadows. Something that's casting a shadow usually kind of gets like lighter as it goes away, but if it's getting into a darker area, sometimes it's just good to say that it's lighter up here and darker down here. You've really got to experiment with it, you've got to figure it out. But yeah, so, alright, I'm going to finish this up and we'll go on from there. Okay, another thing I want to mention is another good reason to have low opacity is so that you can take a little bit of shadow off when you're using the eraser, and you can look at it and say, you know, is that a good amount of shadow that I want to take off? Do I want to take off more or do I want to take off less? You don't have that. If you found that you've taken too much off, you don't have much to go back to. You just hit the undo button a couple times. And if you just need more shadow taken off, then you can just do that. You can take it off little by little until you get that very precise spot that you want. So now this is looking pretty good. This is, if I was to do just a really quick job of shading, this is how I would do it right here. Is, you know, this level, I'd stop at this step. Some of you may think, you know, like looking at my recent pictures, like this doesn't look quite as good as, you know, some of the other ones you've done, and it's probably not. This is just for the sake of showing you how I do it. If you want something even better looking than this, I mean, not so much better, but this might look a little bit sloppy, maybe the shadows aren't as accurate as they could be, but if you want something a little bit better, a little more accurate, it's really just about taking more time. But I went quickly with this because it's just for a tutorial. An extra thing you can do, which is if you want it to look a little bit more stylized, is you can come in here and you can either erase or you can draw sort of under highlights, which we talked about in the last one. We talked about this sphere over here and this little area at the bottom here. And we can do that with this too. And you can also apply it to, if you want like a light source over here that's blue, you can like add some blue to the side. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm not going to erase, because that just takes, you know, time working out those layers. If you want your shading and your lighting to all be in the same layer, I would suggest using erasing, but instead I'm just going to draw it on there. And something I've actually found is a little bit nicer. I used to do it on the color layer, I mean beneath the line layer, but now I feel like doing it on the line layer is a little bit more effective. It kind of emphasizes, you know, because if you do it underneath the line layer, like if I do my underlighting underneath the line layer, then I am getting that highlight like that, but it's kind of taken away by the fact that there's a really dark line right next to it. So I'm going to do it instead, I'm going to move this layer up and I'm going to do it on top of the line layer. And this is something that's just very recently that I adopted and started doing. And now, not only is it lighter down there, but it's really effective when it's coloring over that dark line. And you're still getting that line there, you're still getting the cartoony outline effect while getting that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at different spots where we can add this. For example, on the lip here, we can go over it. And again, like before, we're going to really focus and go over and over again with our pen and the areas where the light is hitting the most. Like in the nose, it's most likely going to hit towards the very bottom of the nose, the most point. Except now we're just changing the direction of our lighting. And that's really all you got to do, is shadows always will be at the opposite point of where the lighting is, and highlights will always be on the same side of where that lighting is. For things like the nose though, I'm going to actually add some on the top because it's a little bit more reflective. And then underneath here, we're going to do the bottom of her chin. And see, I'm stopping short each time. I stopped over here last time, so this time I'm going to stop shorter than that. And we're just going over and over again. And that's really just how this is done. Whether you're erasing or you're drawing on, you're just going over in layers. We really want one of these on the eyes, at least, because the eyes are very shiny and reflective. And we want to make it appear as though that's the case. Another good thing is adding a highlight here, which I usually like to do after I've already colored it in, instead of drawing in a highlight. I usually like to just get a solid brush, just stamp a circle in there. So I'm just going to apply this to the rest of the face, and I'll fast forward and see you after that. One thing I want to say before I continue fast forwarding is for things like this, like the eyebrow, where it is not like a solid stick out, it's kind of like a gradual bump. It's not something that sticks out like the eyeballs, where it's its own object, or the nose, where it's like its own separate piece. It's kind of like a ridge on this object. So for that, I kind of use a very big brush to give it a more softer highlight, and then went back with a harder one. Okay, just wanted to say that. Okay, so I finished doing that, and as you can see, this is what it looked like before, and that's pretty good. But this really emphasizes the form even more by like showing us the edges and where like there's really hard edge lighting. If this looks too harsh to you, you can always, as I've done this on a separate layer, and you should have too, it's probably the best idea, is you can go back and you can decrease the opacity and just really change how intense you want it to be. Or if you don't want to figure it out, you can just do something like soft light or overlay, and that will kind of just do it automatically for you. But I usually like to just adjust the opacity because I feel like that gives me more control. So, anyways, this is the process. My first video I showed you how to just do the process in general of coloring, then applying shadow overall, and then erasing some of that shadow away, working on just the basic highlight, and then coming down here and doing the underlighting. If we wanted to, we could go onto this and we could get a lighter color. I think that's a good idea, but I won't go over it in this video. But you know, you would do something like this where you get a lighter color like this, like white. You put something like soft light as a filter for this layer on top of the shadow layer, and then you'd go over it and you'd make it even lighter up here. To emphasize it even more. But we're not going to do too much of that here. I'm just going to wrap the video up here, and see, that looks even nicer. You've got a 3-color scale look there. But you know, that's the idea behind how I do my shading. The applied technique, as it is to just a drawn, sketched character. And for my last video, we are going to use these shading techniques and what we know about shading, and we're going to see if we can composite, and that's what it's called, composite a character sitting in this chair like you would see in the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit or others like it. So, I'll see you then.